Thank you, Deep Clough, and I'd like to start by thanking the Petitions Committee Chair, Jack Sargent, for opening such an important debate, and to all those who took part in the evidence sessions. I think all members across this chamber recognise the complex issues that exist around utility bills, and that this is complicated by the application of prepaid meters. Whilst there are households and groups who are particularly vulnerable and need assistance with paying their bills, there are also households and individuals who can adequately afford their electricity and gas bills, who for one reason or another choose not to pay them and instead run up high debt. Whilst this may not seem problematic by some, because they view that utility companies can easily weather this loss of income, what it actually means is that that loss is pushed onto other bill payers, who end up subsidising those who refuse to pay. Therefore, there is still a need for prepaid meters, and in some cases, the need for prepaid meters to be mandatory. The evidence that prepaid meters can be an effective way of helping manage household budgets, especially for those living in shared accommodation or temporary rented accommodation, because it reduces the administration of setting up new accounts for short periods. But as we all know, one of the major issues with this and with prepaid meters is that it traditionally, as we've heard, then charges a far higher tariff than direct debits. As such, I'm pleased to see that the UK government, as of July last year, have now enforced the scrapping of prepayment meter premiums by energy companies, and I think this is a big step forward in promoting a fairer and more just system. I do think, Deep Clough, as the report points out, that despite this, there needs to be a more thorough understanding of an individual's vulnerability before prepayment meters are installed. I know that utility companies are fully aware of the needs of vulnerable customers and have made considerable efforts to understand vulnerability and put into place services to help meet those needs. However, it was fundamentally wrong of them to involuntarily install meters during a time of huge inflationary pressure from the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, because they were fully aware that many of their customers would have been vulnerable and struggling to pay. On average, Deep Clough, it takes about 2 years before people facing financial difficulty come forward to seek help. And during this time, they often make poorer financial decisions out of desperation, and this can impact their mental and physical health. We also know that vulnerability can be transient, whereby people are vulnerable for short periods of time, such as after bereavement or job loss. And therefore, I wholeheartedly believe that we should be making efforts to reduce and indeed eliminate the stigma that people can feel with regards to their vulnerability, and the needs to be more awareness of how they can access support. From a personal perspective, I believe that there is considerable merit in energy companies developing a system that can override prepayment meters in times of vulnerability and supply electricity and gas to customers, such as households with children or elderly people during cold weather and winter months. And this, in the grand scheme of things, would ultimately cost, unlikely to cost utility companies that much. I would be interested to know whether or not companies have considered that option, because it could benefit a lot of people in Wales. I'm glad to see that the government has accepted all the recommendations of the report, either fully or in principle, and I believe that this is right that utility companies and Ofgem are continually pushed on this issue, because in truth, it is not an issue that I think will ever go away. We will always have people with these needs in our country. Finally, I would like to mention recommendation 3, one that I fully support. One of the major issues that vulnerable people face is having to retell their experiences and circumstances to multiple organisations, and it would be great benefit to both them and the utility providers if they only had to explain the situation once. I understand that water companies have done a considerable amount of work with regards to sharing priority registers, and that there have been successful trials between water companies and energy providers in sharing this data. I am also aware, however, that there are limitations in terms of GDPR and data sharing, and of course in protecting that information from being abused. But nevertheless, I do believe that this really is the way forward in helping our most vulnerable in our society, and I'm glad to see that the Welsh Government recognise this, and I would be pleased to see more effort from the Government in pushing for this from companies operating in Wales. Thank you.